So today we'll be learning how to research our proto-langs in order to build a more naturalistic a posteriori conlang. Hopefully you've already watched the last two videos, and so you already know what your proto-langs are and at what point your conlang diverges from them. And to be clear, you should also research natlangs that influence your conlang heavily even if they aren't genetically related. Neighbors and substrates. I'll talk more about this in a future video. For paresi, I took notes on Classical Arabic, Vulgar Latin, Koine Greek, Neo-Punic, Berber, Sardinian, Sicilian, Mozarabic, Maltese, and Coptic. So once you have the list of languages you want to research, and the specific time periods of each language you need to focus on, next step is to gather a bunch of resources about each language. You should definitely include the Wikipedia page for each language here, as well as a reference grammar if you can find one. And really any other resources you can, vocabulary lists, grammar charts, dictionaries, conjugators, sample text, or documentation of its sound changes. Another resource I really recommend for this, especially for less documented languages, is the I Love Languages YouTube channel, which has a ton of languages and dialects. And I'll link a good database of reference grammars in the description. But this is where things start to get either really easy or really hard. Some languages are bigger than others, and some languages just have way more documentation. Latin, for example, is incredibly well documented, where something like Proto-Austronesian is less so. So it would be way easier to make a Romlang or Romance conlang like I did with Paresi than to make an Austronesian language spoken in South America. If you're doing a future language, you mostly don't have to worry about this, because your proto-lang is still alive today and most likely either you speak it or it's a very well documented language. Either way, you shouldn't be at a loss for resources. But you're always going to find that some languages don't have a lot of documentation. For example, when I was building Paresi, I found a ton of resources on Latin, Koine Greek, Classical Arabic, and even Coptic, but comparatively few on Proto-Berber, and there's really nothing you can do about that. In the end, you either have to make that language a smaller part of your conlang's history, or you can just use that undocumented space as a breathing room for creative expression. In a way, having a very undocumented language as a proto-lang means you get to experiment more. So once you have your resources, you then just have to look through them and take notes. I know it sounds kind of annoying, but this is how it's gotta go. Trust me, it pays off. When people who speak these languages or their descendants look at your conlang and recognize words or grammatical patterns, or even when someone glances over at you when you're quietly whispering in your conlang and says, "Hey, that sounds like," and then the language you're trying to emulate, that feeling is good. And if you're striving for naturalism, this is the way to go. If you want, you can split your research into three main phases. 1. Phonology and phonotactics, and these resources should be the easiest to come by. 2. Grammar, and you can research this to whatever depth you want. And finally, vocabulary, and you really only have to take notes on vocabulary if your language is dead and not well documented. For example, for Paresi, I took notes on the vocabularies of Berber and Neo-Punic, but not Koine Greek or Classical Arabic because I knew I could always just look up words from those languages. Berber and Neo-Punic had few enough attested words that I just decided to copy and paste all the words I could find into an extra doc. And that's basically the process for taking notes. Then, the third part of research is sorting those notes. Remember how in the last video we made a plan for which languages influenced your conlang when and in what capacities? Like, Paresi was first majorly influenced by Neo-Punic and Berber, phonologically and grammatically, and by loading kinship terms, names of animals and plants, and some trading words. Then later, Koine Greek and Coptic influenced it grammatically, but also by loading many words concerning religion, government, or trade. And finally, Classical Arabic loaded a ton of words concerning law, government, medicine, other professional things. You can also make a plan of how much of your lexicon will be from what language, or even do this for your phonology and grammar too. I knew I wanted about 40% of my lexicon to come from Latin, a quarter from Arabic, 15% from Greek, and so on. You don't have to create exact percentages or anything here, and you definitely won't be able to stick to exactly what you set, but it's still a useful thing to think about. Since you have this plan, you can set up your notes along the plan in a timeline. We'll use the phonology as an example, but this pattern can be extended to grammar as well. So for phonology, in our first period I put the phonology of my proto-lang, in this case Latin, as well as the phonology of the dialect I knew I wanted to make the conlang develop out of, in this case African Vulgar Latin, and finally also a few other Romance languages which I think would undergo similar sound changes. In the next period, Paresi was influenced heavily by Neo-Punic in its phonology and grammar, and so I would put the Neo-Punic phonology as well as the sound changes it was undergoing at that time. We'll talk more about why sound changes per time is so important in the next video. Next comes Coptic and Greek phonology and their sound changes, and finally Arabic. This timeline will be incredibly useful in the future, we start to evolve our proto-langs into our modern conlangs. So, see you then. That's it for this video, and I'll be sure to publish the next one soon. Like and subscribe with notifications if you want to see this series continue. Grazie arrivederci, and thanks for watching.